At 5:12 a.m., a veteran pilot and a quiet airport operations worker walked into a restricted corridor and vanished. No lockdown. No emergency alert. Their access was erased before their families were even notified. Someone inside the airport made it happen. And what was later found behind a sealed wall was never meant to be seen. Before we begin, pause for just 1 second. If you love real-life mysteries that uncover hidden systems, buried crimes, and the kind of truth no one was supposed to find, hit subscribe right now and turn on notifications, because stories like this disappear quietly when no one is watching. At 5:12 a.m. on a cold Tuesday in Phoenix, Arizona, 2 people walked into Sky Harbor Airport and never walked back out. One was a respected airline captain. The other was a woman few people noticed, a quiet operations supervisor with access to everything. Their scheduled flight boarded. The jet departed on time. Hundreds of passengers reached their destination safely. But inside a forgotten maintenance wing beneath the airport, a sealed room hid a secret that would remain untouched for almost 4 decades. No ransom. No suspects. No bodies. Only a car left running near a restricted service gate, and a single employee badge found cracked in half. What makes this case different isn't only how they vanished. It's why. Because this time, the person who uncovered the crime wasn't a pilot. It was a woman on the inside. And the truth she discovered didn't involve drugs or weapons. It involved people. And tonight, you're about to hear the story that an entire airport helped forget. Stay with me. Watch closely. And decide for yourself who the real criminals were. At 5:12 a.m., Captain Elliot Graves stepped out of his rideshare near the employee service entrance, coffee still warm in his hand. He had flown the Phoenix-Salt Lake route for nearly 20 years. Nothing about that morning felt unusual. Except for Lena Morell. Lena wasn't flight crew. She worked airport operations, quiet, efficient, trusted with restricted access codes and late-night clearance logs. Most pilots barely knew her name. But that morning, she was waiting. Security footage later showed them speaking for less than 40 seconds beside a gray utility corridor marked authorized personnel only. There was no argument. No urgency. No visible panic. Just a short exchange. Then Lena swiped her badge and the 2 of them disappeared through the service door. At 5:18 a.m., the corridor camera glitched for 12 seconds. At 5:19 a.m., the feed returned. The hallway was empty. By 6:02 a.m., Lena's personal vehicle was discovered idling beside a restricted loading ramp. Driver's door open. Phone still inside. Her airport badge, snapped clean in half, lay on the concrete. Captain Graves never checked in for his flight. Lena Morell never clocked out. And for the next 36 years, the official story would insist the same impossible thing. 2 people with no history, no connection, and no motive, simply walked away. By noon, Captain Elliot Graves had been declared missing. By sunset, the airline issued a brief statement about a personal emergency. But no announcement was made for Lena Morell. Not publicly. Inside Phoenix Sky Harbor's operations office, her name was quietly removed from the overnight staffing board. Her access codes were disabled before midnight. Her locker was emptied before the next morning shift arrived. To the airport, Lena wasn't a victim. She was a problem. Detective Mara Calder, assigned to airport incidents, noticed it immediately. Every report focused on the pilot. Every interview centered on Elliot's flight schedule, medical history, and recent performance reviews. When Mara asked for Lena's personnel file, a human resources manager hesitated, just long enough to register as fear. She wasn't essential, the woman said quickly. Just an operations coordinator. That was a lie. Lena Morell had clearance to maintenance tunnels, surveillance junctions, emergency override panels, and cargo documentation logs. She could open doors most supervisors couldn't. Mara reviewed the hallway footage again. 40 seconds of conversation. 12 seconds of missing video. And a woman whose job required her to know exactly where the cameras failed. Someone inside that building had erased Lena first. Not from the system. From the story. And that, to Mara Calder, felt intentional. 3 days after the disappearance, Detective Mara Calder received a sealed interdepartment envelope marked Misrouted Internal Audit. It wasn't meant for her. Inside was a single report titled, Operational Access Conflict, Corridor B14. The timestamp stopped her cold. The document had been created at 5:17 a.m., 2 minutes before Lena Morell's badge last appeared on camera. According to the system log, someone had manually overridden a security partition inside Corridor B14, an underground maintenance spur sealed off from public access since the late 1990s. The override wasn't performed from the operations center. It was executed locally, with a physical control panel only available to airport infrastructure supervisors. The report listed 2 badge IDs crossing into the corridor during the override window. One belonged to Captain Elliot Graves. The other belonged to Lena. But beneath the entry, a third line appeared. An access authorization labeled, Temp Clearance, Internal Transfer. No name. No employee number. No badge imprint. Just a placeholder signature. Mara contacted Airport IT. They told her the entry was a formatting error. A system ghost. But she had worked digital crimes long enough to know what real system errors looked like. This one had been typed by hand. Someone had opened a door. Someone had erased themselves from it. And someone had wanted a permanent record, hidden in plain sight. Corridor B14 did not exist on any public blueprint. Not on the airport's digital schematics. Not on the fire evacuation plans. Not even on the emergency maintenance maps stored in the operations vault. But buried inside a microfilm archive from 1996, Detective Mara Calder found it. A thin service spur once built to connect an abandoned power junction to an old cargo lift beneath the western terminal. It had been decommissioned after a structural retrofit. Sealed. Supposedly filled with concrete. When Mara requested physical access, airport facilities stalled for 2 days. Then 3. Then legal stepped in. Finally, after a quiet internal push from the city, a single facilities engineer escorted her below the baggage handling floor, through 2 key-locked doors and a rusted maintenance gate that hadn't been opened in years. The air changed immediately. Stale. Metallic. Still, a faded stenciled label remained on the wall. B14, Auxiliary Transfer. At the end of the narrow passage stood a concrete partition where the cargo lift had once operated. No elevator. No doorway. Just a wall. Except for one detail. A thin vertical seam. Recently resealed. The concrete color didn't match the surrounding structure. And faint drag marks crossed the floor directly into it. Whatever happened to Elliot Graves and Lena Morell didn't happen above ground. The facilities engineer swore the wall had always been there. Mara Calder knew better. The maintenance records listed no structural reinforcement in Corridor B14 for more than 20 years. Yet the concrete patch sealing the vertical seam was less than 6 months old. Fresh composite filler. Industrial grade. The kind used for rapid emergency closures. After 3 hours of paperwork and a single quiet warrant, a demolition technician arrived with a compact drill rig. The first cut rang through the corridor like a gunshot. Dust spilled through the opening. Then air rushed inward, not outward. As the hole widened, Mara raised her flashlight and aimed it through. The beam landed on a steel folding chair. Then a second. Then a long, low utility table bolted into the floor. The room was small, barely 8 by 10 feet. No ventilation duct. No visible emergency release. Just a light fixture mounted high on the wall. It flickered. Still powered. On the table lay a laminated airport routing map. Phoenix Sky Harbor. But someone had circled 3 cargo transfer gates in red marker. And beneath the map, taped to the steel surface, sat a handwritten label. Transfer hold, 14C. Mara didn't need to say it. Everyone in the corridor already understood. This wasn't a forgotten room. It was a waiting room. The room was photographed, sealed, and flagged as a crime scene within an hour. But what stopped Detective Mara Calder wasn't the furniture. It was the log sheet clipped to the wall. A thin paper checklist titled, Temporary Transfer Occupancy Record. Most of the lines were blank. Except 3. Each entry listed a time window, an escort badge number, and a single handwritten name. The handwriting didn't match any airport employee records. But the first name on the list made Mara's chest tighten. Naomi Pierce. The timestamp next to it read, April 3, 2019, 1:42 to 3:10. Mara knew that name. Everyone in Arizona law enforcement did. Naomi Pierce was a financial compliance analyst who vanished while preparing testimony in a federal transportation fraud case. At the time, her disappearance had been ruled a voluntary flight risk. She had a passport, a withdrawn bank account, a carefully shaped story. The second name on the sheet was unfamiliar. The third wasn't. Victor Hale, a low-level cargo broker connected to an interstate human smuggling investigation. He had disappeared in 2021 while on pre-trial release. The pattern snapped into place. This room had been used long before Elliot and Lena walked inside. And suddenly, their disappearance wasn't the beginning. It was the interruption. Because someone had been quietly moving people through this airport. 4 years. And never leaving a trail. Until now. Mara finally received Lena Morell's sealed employment history just after midnight. Not the public HR file. The internal one. Buried beneath routine certifications and performance reviews was a short secondary designation. Special Infrastructure Liaison. Temporary assignment. No department listed. No supervisor signature. Only a start date. January 2018. That was the same year the first missing name appeared on the transfer room log. Mara pulled Lena's terminal activity records. Her badge hadn't been misused. It had been scheduled. Every time a person passed through Corridor B14, Lena's access window had been pre-authorized hours in advance by a restricted administrative console located inside airport security headquarters. Lena wasn't sneaking people through. She was being positioned. But what changed everything was the camera glitch. Mara ran the corrupted hallway footage through a forensic reconstruction tool. The missing 12 seconds weren't erased. They were overwritten by a live internal feed. A different angle. A close-up. The frame stabilized just long enough to reveal Lena's face. She wasn't frightened. She was arguing, pointing back down the corridor, and standing between Captain Elliot Graves and someone else. Someone the camera never quite caught. Only a partial reflection in the security glass. Long hair, a fitted security jacket, and a senior access stripe on the shoulder. The person running this corridor wasn't a man. The senior access stripe narrowed it instantly. Only 3 people at Sky Harbor held that clearance tier. 2 men and 1 woman. Regional Security Director, Allison Crane. Allison had been hired from a federal transportation task force in 2017. Her public reputation was flawless. Crisis management expert. Infrastructure threat consultant. The person brought in to protect the airport from exactly the kind of abuse Mara was now uncovering. When Mara pulled Allison's internal travel logs, the pattern was quiet, but perfect. Every confirmed use of Corridor B14 matched days Allison was physically present on site. Not in meetings. Not on video calls. On the terminal floor. In restricted zones. Alone. Then came the badge override signature. The temporary clearance line from Chapter 3. It matched Allison's administrative encryption key. The final detail sealed it. A payroll anomaly. Lena Morell had been receiving a monthly bonus routed through a non-salary reimbursement account. The approval authority. Allison Crane. Mara finally understood Lena's role. She hadn't been recruited. She had been slowly cornered. Given access. Given money. Given responsibility. Until walking away stopped being possible. But Elliot Graves changed the equation. Because pilots notice patterns. And this one had noticed people disappearing. And asked Lena the wrong question. At the wrong time. Allison Crane hadn't silenced a witness. She had lost control of two. The warrant for Allison Crane was signed at 6:41 a.m. By 6:59, her office was empty. But she hadn't run. She had moved. Mara realized it when a junior dispatcher called from airport surveillance. There's live activity in Corridor B14. The room shouldn't have been accessible anymore. Every access panel had been locked down. Every administrative key suspended. Except one. A master override hard coded into the infrastructure itself. Installed during the terminal rebuild. Only the regional director would even know it existed. When Mara reached the corridor, the transfer room door stood open. The chairs were gone. The table was gone. Only the routing map remained. But the red circles had been replaced. 3 new marks. And beside them, written carefully in black ink. Final transfer, 5:12. That was the exact minute Elliot Graves and Lena Morell had entered the corridor. Mara finally understood the real purpose of the room. It wasn't for holding people. It was for synchronizing them. Moving one person out. Moving another one in. A living exchange point. And Elliot and Lena weren't meant to disappear forever. They were meant to be reassigned. Repackaged. Relocated. But something went wrong. Because someone refused to go quietly. And the entire system had panicked. Allison Crane was arrested 3 hours later at a private charter terminal outside Tucson. She didn't resist. She didn't deny her identity. And she didn't ask for a lawyer. Not at first. What she asked for was Mara. Inside the interview room, Allison's voice was calm. Almost relieved. "You still think this was about smuggling," she said quietly. "It was about risk." She explained it without emotion. The airport had been used as a silent transfer hub for people whose testimony, identities, or legal exposure threatened powerful corporate and political interests. Witnesses were removed. Records were rewritten. New lives were arranged. No court delays. No public trials. Just clean erasure. Lena had been recruited to manage physical routing. Elliot Graves had accidentally noticed repeating escort behavior tied to specific cargo bays. He had asked Lena why a pilot kept being moved off finalized rosters. She told him everything. And when Allison learned Lena planned to go to federal investigators, the standard transfer was prepared. But Lena refused. Elliot refused to abandon her. The corridor became a confrontation. Not a relocation. Not a murder plan. A containment decision. And containment had failed. Because Lena had already done one thing Allison never anticipated. She had sent everything. To an outside journalist. If this story disturbed you, it should. Because nothing you heard tonight relied on a single violent act. It relied on paperwork. On access badges. On people who believed that quietly erasing lives was cleaner than facing what those lives had to say. Lena Morell was never meant to be remembered. She was meant to be processed. Captain Elliot Graves was never meant to become a victim. He was meant to be irrelevant. And the most dangerous part of this entire case is that the system worked. 4 years. So before you scroll away, take one moment and ask yourself something uncomfortable. How many people disappear every year not because someone wanted them dead, but because someone needed them gone? If you believe stories like this deserve daylight, support this channel by liking this video, sharing it, and subscribing. Because silence is what keeps systems like this alive. And attention is what makes them collapse. New deep dive investigations are coming. And the next story you hear might already be unfolding, right now, somewhere you pass through every day.